Long before anyone knew the name David Johnson, there was a woman named Mama Grace whose entire world revolved around her only son. She lived in a small, aging house on the outskirts of Lagos. The roof leaked whenever it rained, and the walls carried the scars of decades of hardship. Yet every morning before dawn, while the city still slept, Mama Grace woke up to prepare food she would sell in the market. Her husband had died when David was only 5 years old. The loss shattered her heart, but she refused to let it destroy her son's future. While other widows depended on relatives, Mama Grace chose a different path. She worked harder than anyone around her. She sold rice, beans, vegetables, and homemade meals. On some days she carried heavy baskets for extra money. On other days she cleaned houses after returning from the market. There were nights when she ate nothing at all. Not because there was no food. Because there was only enough for David. When school fees became difficult to pay, she sold her wedding jewelry, the last gift her husband had ever given her. The neighbors often questioned her sacrifices. Mama Grace, why suffer this much for one child? She always smiled. One day my son will become a great man. That dream became the fuel that kept her going through every struggle. As the years passed, David grew into a bright and ambitious young man. Teachers praised his intelligence. Community leaders admired his discipline. Whenever he received awards at school, Mama Grace sat in the audience with tears of pride in her eyes. She believed God was finally answering her prayers. What she didn't know was that success would eventually place a dangerous distance between them. A distance that would one day destroy her heart. Years passed, and the sacrifices Mama Grace made finally seemed to pay off. David graduated from university with honors and quickly secured a prestigious position at one of Lagos' fastest-growing companies. The entire neighborhood celebrated as if he were their own son. People who had watched him grow up proudly spoke of his achievements. For Mama Grace, it was the happiest period of her life. Every morning she thanked God for protecting her son. Every evening she sat outside her small house telling neighbors how proud she was of him. Soon David's career began moving faster than anyone expected. Promotion followed promotion. His salary increased. He moved into a luxury apartment. He bought expensive suits. He started driving a car worth more than his mother's house. For the first few months, nothing seemed different. He still called regularly. He still visited. He still thanked his mother for everything she had done. But as time passed, a subtle change began to appear. David started spending more time with wealthy executives and influential business people. He attended exclusive events and social gatherings where status mattered more than character. The people around him admired success but rarely respected humble beginnings. Slowly, David became obsessed with fitting into that world. He stopped talking about his childhood struggles. He stopped mentioning the sacrifices his mother had made. Whenever colleagues asked about his background, he gave short answers and quickly changed the subject. For the first time in his life, David felt embarrassed by the poverty he came from. The same poverty his mother had fought against every day to give him a better future. Without realizing it, he was beginning to forget the woman who had made his success possible. One evening at a corporate gala, David met Vanessa. She was elegant, beautiful, and came from one of the wealthiest families in Lagos. Unlike David, she had never experienced hardship. She had grown up surrounded by luxury, private schools, expensive vacations, and influential connections. David was fascinated by her confidence. Vanessa was equally impressed by David's rising success. Their relationship developed quickly. Within a year they were engaged. Mama Grace was overjoyed. She thanked God for bringing someone special into her son's life. But from their very first meeting, Vanessa saw something she didn't like. Mama Grace. She viewed David's mother as a reminder of the poor background David came from. Although Vanessa remained polite in public, she privately criticized almost everything about her. Her clothes. Her speech, her manners, her simple lifestyle. Whenever wealthy guests visited, Vanessa worried that Mama Grace would embarrass them. David initially defended his mother. But over time Vanessa's comments began influencing him. Little by little, her opinions became his opinions. The more successful David became, the more he started seeing his mother through Vanessa's eyes. A woman he once admired now seemed old-fashioned. A woman he once respected now seemed inconvenient. The change was gradual, which made it even more dangerous. Because neither David nor Mama Grace realized how far things had already gone. After the wedding, David and Vanessa moved into a magnificent mansion in one of Lagos' most exclusive neighborhoods. The property was everything David once dreamed about. Luxury cars, private security, beautiful gardens, modern interiors. From the outside, his life looked perfect. But while his wealth increased, his relationship with his mother slowly disappeared. The weekly phone calls became monthly calls. The monthly visits became rare occasions. Sometimes entire months passed without any contact. Mama Grace noticed the distance but refused to complain. Whenever neighbors asked about David, she proudly spoke of his success. She protected his reputation even when her heart was breaking. One afternoon she decided to surprise him. She spent hours preparing his favorite childhood meals. The same meals she used to cook when they lived in poverty. Carrying containers of food, she traveled across Lagos to visit him. When she arrived at the mansion gate, security guards stopped her. Vanessa had instructed them not to allow unannounced visitors. Mama Grace waited for hours beneath the hot sun. Eventually David arrived. For a brief moment, her face lit up with happiness. But instead of welcoming her, he appeared frustrated. He accepted the food, thanked her quickly, then told her he was too busy. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. As she traveled home alone, tears filled her eyes. For the first time, she began wondering if success had taken her son away forever. The tension inside David's mansion continued growing. Vanessa no longer hid her feelings. She openly complained whenever Mama Grace visited. To her, David's mother represented a past she wanted erased. One evening after an argument, Vanessa delivered an ultimatum. Choose your mother or choose this life. David was shocked. But instead of defending the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, he remained silent. For days he wrestled with the decision. Deep inside, memories haunted him. His mother working under the hot sun. His mother selling her jewelry for school fees. His mother skipping meals so he could eat. Yet pride had already taken control. The approval of wealthy people meant more to him than gratitude. Finally, one morning, he made his choice. He entered the guest room where Mama Grace was folding clothes. His expression was cold. His voice lacked emotion. "Mother, I think it's time for you to leave." The words hit her like a thunderbolt. For several seconds she couldn't speak. She simply stared at him. The little boy she once carried on her back was gone. Standing before her was a stranger. Tears filled her eyes. Yet she refused to argue. With trembling hands, she packed her few belongings into an old travel bag. When she reached the mansion gate, she stopped and turned around. Part of her still believed David would call her back. Part of her still believed love would win. But no voice came. The gate closed. And with it, the most painful chapter of her life began. Neither David nor Vanessa knew that 10 years later, the woman they rejected would own more property than anyone on that entire street. The iron gate slammed shut behind Mama Grace. For several moments, she simply stood there, staring at the mansion where her son lived. The same son she had sacrificed everything for. The same son she had protected from hunger, poverty, and pain. Now he had abandoned her. The evening sky slowly darkened as luxury cars passed by without noticing the elderly woman standing alone on the roadside. In her hand was a small travel bag containing everything she owned. A few clothes, a family photograph, and a Bible. Nothing more. Tears streamed down her face as reality finally settled into her heart. She had nowhere to go. The small house she once lived in had already been sold years earlier to help David pay university expenses. Every sacrifice she had made was now gone. She walked for hours through unfamiliar streets. Her feet ached. Her body felt weak. Yet the emotional pain was far worse than the physical exhaustion. Late that night, she found a bus stop and sat quietly on an old bench. Rain began falling. The cold wind cut through her thin clothing. Still, she refused to blame God. Instead, she closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, I don't understand why this is happening. But please don't leave me alone. Nearby, a woman selling roasted corn noticed her. She offered Mama Grace food and a bottle of water. The simple act of kindness brought tears to her eyes. Even strangers showed her more compassion than her own son. As the rain continued falling, Mama Grace made a decision. She would not give up. She would not allow bitterness to destroy her spirit. If life wanted to test her again, she would fight again. Just as she always had. The next morning, Mama Grace woke up exhausted. She had barely slept. Yet she forced herself to continue walking. As she passed through a busy market district, she suddenly felt dizzy from hunger. Her vision blurred. Before she could steady herself, she collapsed. Several people rushed toward her. Most simply washed. But one woman pushed through the crowd. Her name was Esther. A middle-aged businesswoman known throughout the market for her generosity. Esther immediately helped Mama Grace to her feet and brought her to a nearby restaurant. Over a warm meal, Mama Grace shared her story. Not once did she insult David. Not once did she complain. She simply explained what had happened. Esther listened carefully. By the end of the conversation, tears filled her eyes. She couldn't believe a son would treat his mother that way. Instead of offering pity, Esther offered opportunity. She owned several food stalls in the market and needed trustworthy workers. "Work with me," Esther said. "I can't promise wealth, but I can promise dignity." For the first time since being abandoned, Mama Grace smiled. She accepted immediately. That evening she moved into a small room behind one of Esther's shops. The room was tiny. But to Mama Grace, it felt like a palace. For the first time in days, she felt safe. She felt valued. And deep inside, she sensed that God had opened a new door. A door that would eventually lead to a future nobody could imagine. Working at the market reminded Mama Grace of her younger years. Every morning she woke before sunrise. Every evening she returned to her room exhausted. Yet unlike before, something had changed. This time she wasn't working for someone else's future. She was working for her own. Customers quickly noticed her kindness. She treated everyone with respect. Children loved her. Elderly customers trusted her. Business steadily improved. Within months, Esther gave her greater responsibilities. Soon Mama Grace was managing an entire food store by herself. The extra income allowed her to save money. Little by little. Coin by coin. Day by day. Most people her age dreamed of retirement. Mama Grace was building a new beginning. One afternoon she noticed a small empty kiosk available for rent. Many people ignored it because of its poor location. But Mama Grace saw potential. Using nearly all her savings, she rented the kiosk. Then she began selling homemade meals using recipes she had perfected over decades. The first week was difficult. The second week was slightly better. By the third month, customers were lining up every day. Word spread throughout the neighborhood. People loved her food. For the first time in many years, hope replaced fear. Mama Grace wasn't just surviving anymore. She was growing. 2 years passed. Mama Grace's food business continued growing beyond expectations. Customers traveled from different parts of Lagos just to buy her meals. Workers lined up before sunrise. Taxi drivers recommended her food to passengers. Market traders brought their families to eat at her kiosk. For the first time in decades, money was no longer her biggest worry. But Mama Grace remained humble. She remembered the pain of sleeping hungry. She remembered the humiliation of being abandoned. And she remembered the promise she made to herself on that rainy night outside the bus stop. Never depend on anyone again. One afternoon, while delivering food to a nearby neighborhood, she noticed something unusual. Several old buildings on a neglected street were being offered for sale at extremely low prices. Most investors avoided the area. The buildings were old. The roads were damaged. Many believed the neighborhood had no future. But Mama Grace saw something others missed. Construction crews were working nearby. New businesses were beginning to appear. A major road expansion project had been announced. The area was changing. She discussed the opportunity with Esther. Most people thought she was crazy. Why buy property there, they asked. That place is worthless. Yet Mama Grace trusted her instincts. Instead of spending her profits on luxury items, she invested her savings into a small abandoned building. It was the biggest financial risk she had ever taken. The structure needed repairs. The roof leaked. The walls were damaged. Friends warned her she was making a mistake. But Mama Grace had spent her entire life recognizing value where others saw nothing. Years earlier, she had seen potential in a little boy named David. Now she saw potential in an abandoned property. Day after day she supervised renovations. Slowly the building transformed. Soon tenants moved in. Rental payments began arriving every month. For the first time, money started working for her instead of the other way around. What nobody realized was that this small investment would become the foundation of an empire. The success of the first property changed everything. Within a year, the building's value nearly doubled. The road expansion project attracted businesses. New shops opened. Families moved into the neighborhood. Rental demand increased rapidly. For the first time, investors began paying attention to the area. But Mama Grace had arrived first. Using income from her food business and rental property, she purchased another building. Then another. And another. Each investment generated more income. Each success created new opportunities. People who once doubted her began asking for advice. The same market traders who questioned her decisions now admired her vision. Even Esther was amazed. You see things before everyone else does, she told her one evening. Mama Grace smiled. Life had taught her something important. Pain can either destroy a person or teach them wisdom. She had chosen wisdom. Over the next several years, she continued expanding her investments. Yet despite her growing wealth, she never forgot where she came from. She still visited the market. She still helped struggling families. She quietly paid school fees for children whose parents couldn't afford education. Many people benefited from her generosity without ever knowing her identity. Meanwhile, David remained completely unaware of what was happening. He never called. He never visited. He never asked whether his mother was alive. In his mind, she belonged to the past. A chapter he had closed forever. What he didn't know was that Mama Grace was becoming one of the most respected property owners in Lagos. And fate was slowly preparing the day their paths would cross again. A day that would change both of their lives forever. 5 years after being thrown out of her son's mansion, Mama Grace was no longer struggling to survive. She was thriving. The abandoned widow who once slept at a bus stop now owned several income-producing properties across Lagos. Yet she was only getting started. Every week investors approached her with new opportunities. Many assumed she had inherited wealth. Others believed she had powerful connections. Very few people knew the truth. Everything she owned came from hard work, patience, and wise decisions. One morning, while reviewing property reports, she noticed something remarkable. The neglected neighborhood where she purchased her first building was transforming rapidly. New roads had been completed. Modern shopping centers were being built. Banks and businesses were moving into the area. Property prices were rising faster than anywhere else nearby. Most people celebrated the increase in value. Mama Grace saw something bigger. She realized that controlling an entire street would give her influence far beyond simple property ownership. One by one, she began purchasing buildings along the same road. Whenever an owner wanted to sell, she made an offer. Whenever investors overlooked a property, she stepped in. Slowly, almost invisibly, she expanded her holdings. People started calling her the street queen. Not because she was wealthy. Because she seemed to know the future before everyone else. As her portfolio expanded, so did her reputation. Banks respected her. Business owners admired her. Community leaders sought her advice. For the first time in her life, Mama Grace possessed something nobody could take away. Power. And she had earned every bit of it. As the years passed, Mama Grace continued acquiring property. Building after building. Shop after shop. Apartment after apartment. At first, nobody noticed. Then people began talking. By the 8th year after leaving David's home, something extraordinary had happened. Nearly every building on one entire street belonged to Mama Grace. The transformation shocked local investors. The area had become one of Lagos' fastest-growing commercial districts. Businesses competed for space. Rental prices increased dramatically. Companies signed long-term leases. Money flowed into the neighborhood every month. Yet despite her growing fortune, Mama Grace remained humble. She still greeted tenants personally. She still remembered people's names. She still treated janitors with the same respect she showed executives. Her kindness became legendary. Whenever struggling families faced eviction, she helped them. Whenever small businesses needed support, she listened. Unlike many wealthy landlords, she never forgot what poverty felt like. That compassion made people love her even more. Soon newspapers began publishing stories about her success. Community organizations invited her to speak at events. Young entrepreneurs viewed her as an inspiration. The woman who had once been rejected by her own son was now admired by an entire city. And still, David knew nothing. Their worlds had become completely separate. But fate was quietly preparing a reunion neither of them could avoid. While Mama Grace's life continued improving, David's world was beginning to fall apart. For years, success had come easily. Promotions. Luxury vacations. Expensive homes. Prestigious friendships. Everything seemed perfect. But appearances can be deceiving. The company where David worked faced serious financial problems. Management changes created uncertainty. Profits declined. Investors became nervous. Suddenly the future David once considered guaranteed no longer seemed secure. At the same time, cracks began appearing in his marriage. Vanessa's expectations grew larger every year. She wanted more luxury. More status. More influence. Nothing was ever enough. Arguments became common. Stress filled their household. David tried maintaining the image of success, but privately he felt trapped. One evening he sat alone in his office staring at old photographs. Among them was a picture of himself as a child standing beside Mama Grace. For a brief moment, guilt entered his heart. He remembered the sacrifices she made. He remembered her love. He remembered the day she walked away carrying a small travel bag. The memory haunted him. Yet instead of reaching out, he pushed the feeling aside. Some mistakes become easier to ignore than to confront. David didn't realize that life was preparing a lesson he could no longer avoid. Determined to save his reputation and secure his future, David began searching for a major business opportunity. Then he found one. A rapidly developing commercial street in Lagos was attracting enormous investor interest. Businesses wanted office space. Retailers wanted storefronts. Property values were rising every month. Industry experts called it one of the hottest investment locations in the city. David became obsessed with securing property there. If successful, the deal could restore his financial position and elevate his career. For months he negotiated with investors, prepared proposals, attended meetings, studied market reports. Everything pointed toward one conclusion. The street represented a fortune waiting to be claimed. What David didn't know was that almost every important property on that street belonged to one person. Mama Grace. The mother he abandoned. The woman he believed had disappeared from his life forever. As negotiations advanced, David became increasingly excited. He imagined future profits, industry recognition, financial security. He had no idea that destiny was leading him directly toward the truth. And when that truth arrived, it would shake his entire world. A few weeks later, David attended an important investment meeting. Several business leaders gathered around a large conference table. Documents were distributed. Property ownership records were reviewed. Everything seemed routine. Until one name appeared repeatedly. Grace Johnson. David frowned. The name felt familiar. As discussions continued, the same name appeared again. And again. And again. Property owner. Property owner. Property owner. Property owner. Confused, David interrupted the presentation. Who exactly is Grace Johnson? The room immediately fell silent. Several executives exchanged surprised glances. Finally, one investor laughed. You don't know Grace Johnson? Another executive smiled. She's one of the most respected property owners in Lagos. A third added. She practically owns that entire street. David felt a strange sensation in his chest. His heartbeat accelerated. His hands became cold. There were thousands of people named Grace. Surely it couldn't be. Could it? For the first time in 10 years, David found himself thinking about his mother. Not as a memory. Not as a regret. But as a possibility. A possibility that would soon become an unforgettable reality. For days, David couldn't stop thinking about the name he had seen during the investment meeting. Grace Johnson. The woman who supposedly owned most of the commercial properties on the fastest growing street in Lagos. The same name as his mother. At first, he convinced himself it was merely a coincidence. But something deep inside refused to let the thought go. Finally, he instructed his assistant to arrange a meeting with the property owner. The goal was simple. Negotiate a partnership agreement. Secure investment opportunities. Expand his business interest. A meeting was scheduled for the following week. David spent days preparing presentations and financial reports. He expected to meet a wealthy investor surrounded by advisors and security personnel. Perhaps a retired executive. Maybe a powerful entrepreneur. The morning of the meeting arrived. David entered the luxurious conference building with confidence. Everything seemed normal. Until the boardroom doors opened. The moment he stepped inside, his entire world stopped. Sitting at the head of the table was Mama Grace. His mother. The woman he had abandoned 10 years earlier. The woman he believed was struggling somewhere far away. The woman he threw out of his home. David froze. His briefcase slipped from his hand. His face turned pale. For several seconds he couldn't breathe. Meanwhile, Mama Grace remained calm. Elegant. Confident. Powerful. The frightened widow he remembered no longer existed. She had become someone entirely different. Someone far beyond anything he had imagined. The room remained silent. Several executives sensed tension but didn't understand why. David stared at Mama Grace. Mama Grace stared back. Years of memories filled the space between them. The sacrifices. The struggles. The abandonment. The tears. Everything seemed present in that single moment. David expected anger. He expected accusations. Perhaps even revenge. Instead, Mama Grace simply smiled politely. A professional smile. The kind offered to a business associate. Not a son. That hurt more than any insult could have. For 10 years he had ignored her existence. Now she treated him exactly the same way. As a stranger. The meeting continued. Property values were discussed. Business opportunities were reviewed. Investment projections were presented. Throughout the entire discussion, Mama Grace remained composed and professional. She never mentioned the past. Never mentioned the day he abandoned her. Never mentioned the pain he caused. When the meeting ended, David finally found the courage to speak. Mother. The word barely escaped his mouth. Mama Grace paused. For a brief moment sadness appeared in her eyes. Then it disappeared. Mr. Johnson, she replied calmly. Please direct any business questions through my office. The statement felt like a knife piercing his heart. For the first time, David truly understood what he had lost. After the meeting, David became obsessed with learning everything about Mama Grace. He hired researchers. Reviewed public records. Spoke with business leaders. What he discovered left him speechless. His mother wasn't simply wealthy. She was respected. Admired. Loved. Thousands of people knew her name. Entire communities benefited from her generosity. She had funded schools. Paid medical bills for struggling families. Provided scholarships for children. Supported small businesses. Created jobs. People spoke about her with admiration and gratitude. The more David learned, the worse he felt. Because every success story reminded him of a painful truth. She achieved everything without him. The woman he considered weak had become stronger than anyone he knew. Meanwhile, his own life was falling apart. His company faced increasing financial pressure. His marriage was becoming unstable. His reputation was weakening. For years he believed success made him superior. Now he realized true success had belonged to his mother all along. One evening he visited one of her properties. Tenants greeted her warmly. Children ran toward her smiling. Business owners thanked her. Watching from a distance, David felt ashamed. This was the woman he had thrown away. Yet she had spent the last decade helping others. The contrast between them was impossible to ignore. News of Mama Grace's success spread rapidly. Soon Vanessa learned the truth. At first she refused to believe it. The elderly woman she once considered an embarrassment now controlled millions in property assets. It seemed impossible. But the evidence was everywhere. Newspapers. Business magazines. Industry reports. Mama Grace had become one of Lagos' most influential property owners. Vanessa panicked. For years she had encouraged David to distance himself from his mother. Now that decision looked disastrous. The social circles she worked so hard to impress suddenly admired Mama Grace. People spoke about her accomplishments. Her generosity. Her business intelligence. Vanessa realized she had made a terrible mistake. But unlike David, her regret was motivated by opportunity. He saw wealth, influence, status. Not family. Not love. Not forgiveness. One evening she suggested visiting Mama Grace. Perhaps they could repair the relationship. Perhaps they could become part of her life again. David immediately recognized the selfish motivation behind her words. For the first time in years, he disagreed with his wife. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about property. This was about a mother he betrayed. And a wound he created. A wound only he could attempt to heal. For several weeks, David struggled with guilt. Every night he replayed the same memory. His mother standing at the gate, holding an old travel bag, waiting for him to call her back. And him doing nothing. Eventually, he realized he could no longer live with the regret. One Saturday morning, he drove to her office. Not as a businessman. Not as an investor. As a son. His hands trembled as he entered the building. Employees greeted him politely and directed him toward her office. When he arrived, Mama Grace was reviewing documents. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then David slowly stepped forward. Tears filled his eyes. Years of pride finally collapsed. "I'm sorry, Mother." The words were simple. But they carried 10 years of guilt. 10 years of shame. 10 years of regret. David fell to his knees. For the first time since childhood, he cried openly. "I was wrong. I failed you. I forgot everything you sacrificed." The room became silent. Mama Grace looked at the son she once loved more than her own life. The son who had broken her heart. The son who now stood before her completely broken himself. Slowly, tears appeared in her eyes. But whether forgiveness would come remained uncertain. The office remained silent. David knelt on the floor, tears running down his face. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a wealthy executive. He wasn't a successful professional. He was simply a son overwhelmed by regret. Mama Grace looked at him carefully. Memories flooded her mind. The little boy she carried on her back. The child she protected during difficult times. The teenager she encouraged through school. The young man she believed would change her life. Then came the painful memories. The mansion. The argument. The travel bag. The closed gate. The lonely nights. The years of silence. Every wound returned at once. Part of her wanted answers. Part of her wanted justice. But another part remembered something stronger. Love. A mother's love. The kind of love that survives even the deepest betrayal. Slowly, she stood from her chair. David lowered his head, unable to face her. Then he felt a gentle hand on his shoulder. Looking up, he saw tears in his mother's eyes. "You broke my heart, David." The words struck him harder than anything else. But no matter what happened. She paused. "You are still my son." David cried even harder. Years of guilt poured out of him. For the first time since abandoning her, he felt the weight of his actions. And for the first time, he felt hope. Hope that forgiveness might still be possible. News of the reconciliation spread slowly. Many people who knew Mama Grace were surprised. Some believed David didn't deserve forgiveness. Others thought she should never speak to him again. After everything he had done, nobody would have blamed her. But Mama Grace understood something most people didn't. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from bitterness. One afternoon she invited David to visit one of her community projects. Together they walked through a school she had helped build. Children laughed and played. Teachers greeted her warmly. Parents thanked her for changing their lives. David watched everything in silence. The more he learned about his mother's work, the more ashamed he became. While he had spent years chasing status, she had spent years changing lives. Eventually they sat beneath a large tree outside the school. David looked at her. "How did you do it?" Mama Grace smiled. "When you lose everything, you discover what truly matters." Those words stayed with him. Because he realized he had spent years chasing wealth while neglecting character. His mother had achieved both. That afternoon marked the beginning of a new relationship. Not the same relationship they once had. But something stronger. Something built on honesty. And earned through pain. As David worked to rebuild his relationship with his mother, life continued teaching important lessons. His marriage to Vanessa never fully recovered. Years of selfish decisions had created deep cracks. Eventually Vanessa left. The luxury lifestyle she valued above everything else disappeared. Many of the social connections David once considered important vanished as well. The people who celebrated his success disappeared when difficulties arrived. For the first time, David understood what his mother had always known. Real wealth isn't measured by money. It's measured by relationships. By loyalty. By character. The irony wasn't lost on him. The mother he abandoned became the only person who remained by his side. Whenever he faced challenges, she encouraged him. Whenever he doubted himself, she reminded him to keep moving forward. Not because he deserved it. Because she chose grace over revenge. David often thought about the day he threw her out. The memory never stopped hurting. But now the pain served a purpose. It reminded him never to repeat the same mistake. Karma had completed its lesson. Not through destruction, but through understanding. Several months later, Mama Grace invited David for a special walk. Together they visited the famous commercial street she owned. The same street that had transformed her life. The same street that made her one of the most respected property owners in Lagos. As they walked past shops, offices, restaurants, and apartment buildings, people greeted her everywhere. Some called her Mama. Others called her Madam Grace. Children ran toward her. Business owners thanked her. Families smiled when they saw her. David noticed something extraordinary. Nobody admired her because she was rich. They admired her because she cared. Every building represented a chapter of her journey. Every property represented a risk she took. Every success represented a challenge she overcame. Finally they reached the end of the street. David looked around in amazement. Almost everything they could see belonged to his mother. The woman he once believed had nothing. The woman he abandoned with only a travel bag. Tears filled his eyes again. He realized that true greatness had never been about money. It had always been about resilience. And nobody embodied resilience more than Mama Grace. Years later, Mama Grace became more than a successful property owner. She became a symbol of hope. Her story inspired countless people across Lagos and beyond. People admired her not because she became wealthy, but because she refused to let betrayal define her future. Instead of choosing bitterness, she chose growth. Instead of seeking revenge, she chose purpose. Instead of giving up, she built something extraordinary. David dedicated himself to honoring her legacy. He spent years helping manage community projects and charitable programs. Together they funded schools, supported families, created opportunities for young entrepreneurs. The relationship they rebuilt was never perfect. Some scars remained. But love had returned. One evening, as the sun set over the famous street she owned, Mama Grace stood quietly watching people go about their lives. Businesses thrived. Families prospered. Children laughed. Dreams were being built. Everything she once prayed for had become reality. Not through luck. Not through revenge. Through faith. through perseverance, through courage. And as David stood beside her, he finally understood the lesson that changed his life forever. Never forget the people who sacrificed everything for you. Because one day, the person you overlook may become the greatest blessing you ever had.